Meanwhile, to another court now, judgment being reserved in the case the Democratic Alliance has brought against the ANC in the DA's bid to stop cadre deployment. Our reporter Mbali Thethani been following the case. That case, of course, taking place in the High Court in Tshwane. Mbali, good afternoon to you. Arguments now wrapped up. What for you have been the main points?
That's certainly right, Stephen. Of course, we saw the arguments here wrapping up in the Pretoria High Court. And of course, that pertains to the arguments being heard in the DA's case, saying that it wants the ANC's policy of course, cadre deployment to be considered as unconstitutional and invalid. And of course, Stephen, this is the first time that we've seen a political party in this country, taking another political party to court to actually have one of their policies to be declared unconstitutional. So it is really an unprecedented matter that we heard here today. Of course, today being the second and final day in those arguments, Stephen, we also then saw just yesterday the DA saying that the ANC's cadre deployment policy is a cancer, and a cancer that this country does not need. But at the same time today, also hearing arguments from the President's legal team as well as government's legal team saying that, well, as the DA wants this matter, or rather the cadre deployment policy, to be declared unconstitutional, it does not say which rights are being infringed upon. We're going to bring in now the DA's Schreiber. Leon, of course, it is indeed day 2 and the final day of this matter as the DA. What do you make of the arguments in which we saw today? Of course, the President's legal team as well as the state's legal team also poking holes in your arguments, saying that when it comes to the matter of being unconstitutional, you did not point out which rights are being infringed upon.
Yes, I'm feeling very confident now that we've seen the case argued in its entirety. I think the crucial point was really made in the closing argument from the DA's legal representative, was that for 5 hours we heard opposing arguments from the ANC, from the President, from the government, all talking about everything under the sun except the core and essence of our case. And I think the reality is, as we made in the closing argument, put it to the court as well, that the cadre deployment policy of the ANC violates the rule of law. It violates the Constitution, and in fact it undermines constitutional democracy. And by that virtue, it infringes on a range of constitutional rights, including, for example, the right to equality, if you are being disfavored when you apply for a position because you don't have the inside track through the cadre deployment policy. So I think that the counter-arguments have been dealt a very serious blow here today by our closing argument. And of course now we await judgment in what I agree is not only an unprecedented case, but I think also a crucial one to map the way forward for the rebuilding and in fact the construction of a professional public service.
How important is this case to the rest of the country? Because I know that it's quite rare to see another political party taking another one to court on the basis of its own policy. Yeah. Why is it so important for you to highlight this issue in this court?
I think there are 2 points to make there. The first one is really there was an attempt to make the argument that somehow the ANC is not bound by the Constitution. It's a private organization and somehow it's not bound by the Constitution. And I think it's a critical point that was made here today, that all South Africans, all of us, are actually bound by the need to uphold the rule of law, the Constitution, and all that it entails. So I think that is an important principle to establish, and we can easily think about cases where there might be extreme positions adopted by political parties going forward. I mean, there's a number of examples that you could come up with, which would also actually infringe on the Constitution. So I think that's interesting out of this case. But perhaps most important is the practical realities, which we believe really motivate our case here as well. And that is the fact that cadre deployment in our submissions should be seen as a fundamental cause of not only state capture, as the Zondo Commission pointed out, but also of corruption and perhaps most devastatingly, declining service delivery. I mean, the load shedding crisis that we're experiencing, PRASA, Transnet, all of these SOEs, the post office, these things that are no longer functioning, are traced back to the reality that many of the senior officials leading those institutions were not appointed based on an open and fair selection process where they demonstrated that they're the best person, but because of being loyal to a political party.
But that's what you were also criticized on as the DA, that you could not actually point out when it comes to the meetings, on the minutes of the cadre deployment policy, and of course the matter in which you brought here today.
Yes, there's a great irony to that counter-argument, though, which is, of course, that the cadre deployment committee operates in complete secrecy, and it was really also unprecedented that we got hold of those minutes last year in the first place. So I think that argument is not going to go very far, given the secretive nature of the committee itself. I think more importantly is the content of the policy. And that's what we really saw, I think, again, for the first time in South Africa's democratic history. We saw the policy being unpacked and pulled apart in the DA's closing argument, making it clear that this policy explicitly says that the ANC wishes to capture independent commissions like the Electoral Commission. It wishes to capture and control levers of power, in its own words, over the judiciary, over the media. These are things that have now been put for the first time before a court of law, and I think that those may end up being quite decisive in the decision we see here.
And should you not win here, are you going to take it to a higher court?
My suspicion is that, especially given the fact that there were 5 different advocates trying to prevent us from winning this case, that whoever ends up on the losing side, this will not be the end of the story.
All right, thank you very much. That is Leon Schreiber there, Stephen, just talking about, their expectations when it comes to the case that they have presented to this court. Of course, we do await the final verdict from the full bench of judges in which we saw in this matter. Certainly unprecedented there, having one political party taking another to court over a political party's policy.
Well, Mbali Thethani, let's see what happens. Thank you. I think that prediction that it won't be the last court case on this, probably correct. Well.